Tonight, live from 30 feet under the permafrost in Tuktoyaktuk, Northwest Territories, it's a special episode of The Source. Hello from Tuktoyaktuk on the Arctic Ocean, just a few degrees south of the North Pole. I've never been here before, and frankly, like most Southies, it wouldn't even be accurate to say that I had the wrong impression about the North, because that would imply I had an impression about it at all. Fact is, I don't think most Canadians even think about the far North. Canada is the second biggest country in the world, if you look at a map, but we might as well be like the South American country of Chile, a long, narrow country, because so many of us never leave the little band along the U.S. border. I mean, the whole Northwest Territories has a population of just 41,000. Another 33,000 in the Yukon and 31,000 in Nunavut. Add it all together, and you've barely got 100,000 people, about the population of Thunder Bay, in a landmass larger than India. In other words, absolutely fascinating. I mean, I don't think I'd like to visit here in February, but in the summer it's spectacular. No need to go on exotic eco-tours in faraway countries. You could have 1 million square miles pretty much to yourself up here in your own country to go hiking and camping and fishing. It sure feels different than the South. The airplanes have polar bear pictures on their tails, and at northern airports, Yellowknife, Norman Wells, Inuvik, you don't have wallet-stealing, breast-groping, fake airport security guards like you do in Southern airports. You just walk right on the plane. It's as if they actually trust their citizens or something. Or maybe no Northies would accept such a stupid job as fake security. I don't know. But either way, I sure like the freedom up here. But it's not just the geography that we don't know enough about down south. We don't know about their politics. Now, I'm not talking about their local, inside baseball stuff, who's premier, who's mayor. That's not particularly interesting to Southies, although it is important to note that the most senior political ranks in the North are in fact filled by Aboriginal leaders. No, what I'm talking about is how Northern Canada, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, have managed to avoid the race-based anti-oil and anti-mining conflict that is so damaging to Southern Canada. Up here, it's almost unanimous, certainly an overwhelming majority, that's for sure, who believe in developing natural resources. Of course they want to do it in a safe and environmental way, duh, but they live here. But with that obvious condition, they're raring to go. But here, I met the CEO of the Aboriginal Pipeline Group, who literally led the crowd in a cheer. Seriously, he told them to stand up and cheer for a massive pipeline from Inuvik all the way down to Alberta. The boss of the Inuvialuit, that's one of the Inuit groups, says she does her best to keep out the Greenpeace riffraff. Seriously, she says that. I think a lot of Northerners lost their patience for foreign destroyers when they wiped out all the fur trading jobs 30 years ago, and they're not going to lie back and let foreign Greenpeace radicals kill the oil and gas jobs today. It felt personal, actually, as if they had resolved to honor the memory of their parents, many of whom were trappers and whalers, by not letting Greenpeace win again. What was also interesting for me was to hear complaints from Northern Aboriginal leaders about the CBC. Seriously, unsolicited, they complained to me about how the CBC is anti-development and anti-mining and anti-oil and does not reflect the will of the Aboriginal people here. I detected that myself. Believe it or not, I did 3 interviews with the CBC while I've been up here. For some reason, they thought my visit was newsworthy, and as you know, I'm always happy to appear on the state broadcaster. But the interviewers always asked me questions that sounded like they were written in Toronto or Vancouver by anti-oil activists, instead of written in Yellowknife or Inuvik by locals who want to earn a real living in a real job, instead of just milking the taxpayer teat forever. Really couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it because the NSM, the non-Sun media, has developed such a strong narrative that Aboriginals hate oil and gas and pipelines and mines, and that resource companies are the bad guys. I mean, I always knew it wasn't true, but there were some very vocal Aboriginals in BC and Alberta who were full-time campaigners against the oil sands, so that NSM narrative had some credibility. So imagine how stunned I was to see an entire region of the country, 1/3 of the country by landmass, that literally can't wait for a pipeline to be built and that wanted to correct the propaganda on the CBC. That's incredibly important for Southies like me to know. Now, maybe it's just the leadership of the Gwich'in and the Inuvialuit. Maybe they're culturally different. I was impressed with the entrepreneurial spirit I saw throughout the North and the total integration of their community in modern business life. Maybe there is something particularly industrious about the Gwich'in and Inuvialuit, but I guess it could be. I think it's economic self-interest, a human trait common to all of us, matched with some savvy political leadership. And then there's also the lack of foreign meddlers. Don't underestimate that. Don't underestimate the damage that the Greenpeaces of the world have done to the South. I mean, we know for a fact that it has been the deliberate strategy of foreign lobbyists who fund the anti-oil sands campaign to pit Aboriginal Canadians against white Canadians, basically to provoke a mini race war. I do not exaggerate. Here's the business plan of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund out of New York. Remember them? They're a group of anti-Canadian, anti-oil sands billionaires. We went through their political blueprint on the show before. Look at page 36 of their plan here. Their deliberate strategy is to whip up discord between Aboriginal people and the energy business. It's written right there. These foreign meddlers have made a conscious strategic decision to incite racial disunity in Canada to stop oil and gas production. Foreign money, like the San Francisco-based Tides Foundation, even gives money directly to some BC Indian bands to fight against resource development. It's working, I hate to say it, at least in the South. Well, that strategy doesn't work if the oil and gas industry itself is Aboriginal, which it is in the North. I flew up here on an airline 100% Aboriginal owned, Canadian North. The trucking companies, the logistics companies, the hotels, the restaurants, everyone who stands to make a buck off oil and gas production up here, well, they're Aboriginal themselves. And unlike some of southern Canada, the issue of land claims is resolved. It's done. There's no more fighting over it. The different Aboriginal groups, with names like the Inuvialuit and the Gwich'in, they've got their deal. They're full partners in the North now in respect of resource development and the environment. So, for example, that big Mackenzie Valley pipeline project that would bring natural gas from the Arctic down south, well, the Inuit own 1/3 of that. The resource companies versus Aboriginals thing, that doesn't even work up here. I also want us Southies to take a lesson from the North, to replicate their success, to resolve the land claims in the South in a manner that brings out the natural entrepreneurial instincts in Aboriginal communities and starts to make them think like owners, not objectors, like owners who have as much to gain from oil and gas as any white businessman. I know that companies like Enbridge are trying to do this by giving Indian bands a $500 million equity stake in the Northern Gateway pipeline, for example, plus set-asides for Aboriginal employment to build the thing. That's great, and the majority of Indian bands along that route have accepted it. But I also think we have to weed out the racists who are paying money and hiring lobbyists and lawyers to specifically pit Aboriginals against non-Aboriginals. I'm talking about the overt plan by the Rockefeller brothers and their local lobby groups like Forest Ethics and the Pembina Institute to use Aboriginal spokesmen as a cover for their anti-oil sands radicalism. Basically, those foreigners are hiring a few Indian actors to cover up the non-Canadian roots of the anti-oil sands campaign. What I've learned from the North is that Aboriginals and the rest of us can work together to build this country, and there's enough for all of us to get rich. I want to bring that message south, since the CBC won't, and I want to rip the mask off the foreign lobbyists who have so cynically tried to sow seeds of dissent in our multiracial country.